Have you ever felt like life threw every obstacle your way, yet somehow you found a way to rise? Today's guest is the embodiment of resilience, purpose, and unapologetic authenticity. From navigating the challenges of dyslexia, ADHD, and severe asthma to breaking barriers in politics and advocacy, she's a proof that setbacks can fuel your greatest successes. If you're ready to redefine what it means to lead, thrive, and live out loud, this episode is definitely for you. Welcome to Beyond the Quo, and I'm Stacey Luces, and today I'm so thrilled to welcome Takeata King Pang. Hi.
Hello.
It's amazing to have you. And these are moments we're going to dig deep into what defines us. We're going to talk about redefining success, how to live more authentically, and lead courageously. I'm your host, and I can't wait for us to dive in with our powerhouse guest because she definitely inspires me with her resilience, her advocacy, and the transformations that you have. Takeata, you're not just a leader. I feel like you're such a force of nature. As the executive director of the Women's Foundation of Florida, which is where we met, she's doubled its impact and reach, empowering women not only in our city, but across the state. With a career spanning 2 decades in politics, activism, and advocacy, she's fought for women's equality, racial justice, and holding leaders accountable. But what makes your story truly remarkable is the human side. You are a multiracial woman navigating all of those things, dyslexia, ADHD, and severe asthma, and these challenges have shaped your journey in profound ways. So your life story isn't just about overcoming. It's about thriving in the face of adversity, definitely living beyond the quo. And in this episode, we're going to explore a lot about what it means to lead with courage, embrace failure, and create impact when the odds are stacked or feel like they're stacked against you. So get ready, everyone. This conversation is surely going to challenge us. Takeata, again, thanks for being on. And I want to start with something you said, which had me laughing because it's a complete truth. I strive to live as loud as possible because being my authentic self can help another person. I have never heard it put in that way. Usually people are like, I live out loud because I grew up shy or I want to be heard or whatever. But tell me what that means to you.
I actually have spent the majority of my life being told, quiet down, calm down, be less, be less.
Yeah.
And so as I've grown older, as I've matured, one of the things I realized is being my authentic self out loud, anywhere I am, empowers other individuals around me
For sure.
to feel comfortable. And I used to joke like I had mentees everywhere I went, but the reality was people who were around me felt really safe to be who they were.
Yeah.
And when I realized that, I realized it was somewhat of a superpower of being able to create spaces that allow people to feel comfortable, to show up who and how they are. And I will say my husband was really integral in helping me figure this out because he constantly tells me, he's like, you're the only place I feel safe to be entirely myself. And he's a very shy, quiet individual.
Yeah. I love that. So Kevin and I, my husband and I have been married for 22 years. And I tell people I'm an introvert. And they're like, no way. But I do think I was thinking about our marriage and somebody asked me like, what's the secret? I don't think there are actually secrets. I mean, none of these things are rocket science. But I love what you said about your husband talking about you being a safe space that he could be himself. I think that translates in relationships also. And most of what you do for the Women's Foundation of Florida is dependent on relationships and creating not only a safe space, but psychological safety, especially for some of the missions and organizations that you support. Tell me about, so I grew up in Trinidad in a very strict religious home. And a lot of times we could not use our voices, right? We could not be outspoken, right? You have to be a good girl, seen but not heard. How, in the work that you do, helping to curate the future leaders of tomorrow, especially women that are not used to taking up space, whether it's vocally or emotionally or spiritually or shining, right? How has some of this translated into supporting them better, but also helping them own their own voice and their loudness?
I think it really, I was so fortunate to be raised by a powerhouse woman, a single mother, a feminist. I mean, she was marching on Washington before I was born.
Yeah.
And she really, that bled into everything. Our family was run. We were democracy. We voted as a family. And sometimes we beat her, me and my sister, and we got the things the way we wanted. But she was always very much, use your voice. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you need, and we'll figure out how to get there. And she really instilled that in me most of my young life as someone who grew up with learning disabilities and special ed programs. She's like, if you don't tell us what you need and how you need it, we won't know. And so I learned very early on that I could get what I needed just by asking. And being told no was just part of it, right? Like, that's like, I love what's the worst they could say is no. And I think that really having that strong foundation and that comfort level of being told from a very young age that my voice mattered, that what I had to say mattered, that I had autonomy and control over myself from a very, very young age, that has helped me be a more confident adult. And that allows me then to take that into the work that we do. And working with women, it's really interesting. I grew up I was a guy's girl. I was a tomboy. Like, I didn't have female friends. Like, I literally joined a sorority in college to get to know how to be friends with girls. It didn't work. And now I run a women's organization.
The irony.
and it was because of, I think, that difference of I was never afraid to take up space. I was never afraid to open my mouth and say what I was thinking at every age, in every room. And so being able to turn around and help encourage women to do that and to, like I said earlier, like to show them that like you can do it. What's the worst? I mean, I have literally fallen off stages before, got up laughing, and that
so powerful.
Process gets people to feel so comfortable. Like, okay, let me get up there. I can, if she can fall off and be okay, I can get up there and say my name for 5 minutes. And so I think that the number one, the leading by example, but creating a space that really tells women what you have to say matters. The way you say it doesn't matter as much. Everyone is different. And we've created these kind of boxes that people have to fit in to be a leader, to be important, to be in charge. And none of that matters. Everyone leads from a different place and in a different way. And when we come together, that's where like the magic really happens. Juice.
One of the best leadership approaches that I learned back in my corporate career was lead from where you are. And it was really a cultural ethos of, putting aside the titles and the big budget that people thought we needed to do something great. And I remember I was in my 20s when I first heard that. And it made such an impact on me, like lead from where you are. And then stacked on top of that later on when I got into coaching, it was everything I have is within me now. And so those two things, I feel, if I were to talk to my 8-year-old me or my 10-year-old self, as a shy kid, as a very bright kid, but still feeling a little bit out of place, like those would be the two things I would have loved to have heard. If you had to speak to kind of that little girl inside of all of us, and you've kind of touched on some of it, but if you were talking to that little girl inside of us, she still exists. And she comes out when we have big decisions to make, when we have big things that feel risky and audacious, and we wonder, what are people going to say about me and how I look, right? Which is like, for some reason, society has ingrained in us this metric of how will I look? And I was watching a powerful speech. I forget the celebrity, but she, of course, looked magnificent. I mean, it was the Grammys or whatever, but they were like, show us some leg.
I just saw that recently.
That, right?
Yes.
And she was like, I can't believe you asked me that. I can't believe that you said that. And so to that little girl in us that's always worried about how we freaking look, right? Like how are people going to like perceive us for whatever that is? But what would you say to that little girl inside of us that sometimes stops us from doing big, amazing things?
That's a big one, right? Everyone, it's so built in to be concerned about how you appear, how people see you, how you're perceived. I grew up very bullied. I mean, I was in special ed. I was a mixed race girl in a predominantly white school. I had a single mom who never came to anything at school, so that kid sitting alone. There were so many reasons. And so I had to learn really early on that what other people thought of me or said of me didn't matter. And that's really hard for people to embrace, but I think you have to spend time. I read this in like the middle school. I think it was in like Teen People or like one of those girl magazines that they gave us.
Between NKOTB.
Yes. It was, stare at yourself in the mirror for 10 minutes every day. Don't like pick yourself, but just look at yourself. And I started doing that. And then like I just started picking out, I really like how my eyes look and I have this really great smile. And the more you stare at yourself, the more you actually appreciate how you look.
I love that.
And I think it's the same in how you're preparing to show up in the world, is just lean so intensely into who you are, who makes you happy, how you're most comfortable, and let other people see that. And some people may not like it. Some people may have things to say about it, but the people who do are your people. That's the community that will embrace you.
And I think part of leading yourself, like we talk a lot about leading other people, but part of the journey is leading yourself authentically and then finding the spaces that match you, even if it takes a couple of years or even an entire lifetime. And I think one of the, a discussion point I have with a lot of clients and a lot of people are like, well, I can't be myself if I'm in that position. Like with all of the cultural expectations of the company and stakeholder, whatever. But what do you say to successful people? Because one of the things I talk about is redefining success for you, like on your own terms. And again, it may not necessarily be a big leap of faith and you're like, oh, changing everything in your life, but it could be figuring out your core values or figuring out boundaries. Like, how do you infuse yourself? And I want you to kind of think about it from not only the foundation perspective, but women leading, like in places where we are told subliminally and not so subliminally that we don't belong. But how do we infuse ourselves so that we don't become lost in the mission? Because it happens, right? We're burning out. I think for middle-aged women, I think I'm a little bit older than you, the suicide rates are super high. Depression and anxiety is like at 60%. It's so many stacked things, right? We were just talking about hair loss in women and perimenopause and menopause. And I loved what you said about we kind of just accept that that's par for the course, and it's not. It's all of these stacks and stacks that add up to, if we're not careful, a pretty miserable decade. And so how do we redefine success and kind of revisit things that make us show up in ways that we are happy, but still executing the mission? And I know I'm talking about specifically foundation work, like nonprofits, like doing the work of the people, because that's sometimes a thankless job.
It's funny that you ask that, because when our co-founder of the Women's Foundation, Judith Selzer, approached me, I was the chief program officer. I had been the first paid staff member we have ever had on the foundation. And she said, Takeata, it's time. I think you need to step into the executive director role. And I literally laughed at her. I was like, you're kidding. I can't take it anymore. And that was honestly the first time in my life I said no to a challenge. It was the first time I'd ever said no to Judith when she told me jump off a cliff.
Shout out to Judith.
Right? And the more amazing part is this, having a mentor, a sponsor, a friend that knows you this well. She was like really taken aback. She's like, wait a minute, Takeata?
Yeah.
She's like, can we dig into this? She's like, I'm not saying you're wrong. I want to understand. And the more we dug into it, honestly, what it was I was afraid that I didn't fit what a nonprofit leader in Palm Beach County in Florida looked like. I do things differently than everyone else. I get critiqued by other nonprofit organizations and grant organizations that say, no, you're not doing it like everyone else. And so in my mind, I was just like, no, that would be the worst thing for the Women's Foundation is for me to come on board and do things just completely different. And we spent a couple weeks going back and forth. She gave me time to really think about it. But having someone say, Takeata, I can't believe you just said no. Like, are you okay? That was literally her first question. And so I spent a lot of time really thinking about that and talking with my mentor about what could this look like. And I was like, well, I don't want to do this and I don't want to do. She's like, you don't have to. Just because that's how everyone else does it doesn't mean you have to. And at the end of the day, she's like, this organization has always done things their own way. And at that point, we were a 10-year organization.
Yeah.
We're looking at our 20th anniversary here coming up. And so it was a really eye-opening piece for my career, I think, in number one, having that experience of saying no, because, again, never happened before to me. But really leaning into, okay, why is this uncomfortable? Why do I feel like I need to fit in? And, like, we spent a lot of time, here are the areas where you can really excel. Here's what you do differently, but here's why it's effective. And when I look back at kind of where we are now with the organization and some of our programs, I'm just like, yep, I don't regret making that choice.
I love that. And I want to kind of put a pin in something. So it took courage to say no, because sometimes we feel like we would be a detriment to the mission. And I think that comes from a beautiful place too, right? But on the other side of that, I want to talk about the courage it takes for somebody that clearly loves you and has your best interest, like Judith, like mentors that we have in our life, or people that see within us the possibility. And when we want to go back behind the curtain, they're like, no, let's just talk about it. Like, I feel like there's so many people that accept no from someone that has so much potential. You know, we'll talk a little bit about kind of some of the work you do in the realm of politics and advocacy, especially in South Florida. But that is such a cool dynamic. Stepping into the vacuum of a person that you know can do it, and being and honoring where they are, not being pushy about it or in their face about it, but also the grace that we can show when maybe we truly aren't ready. But there's how to close the gap, right? What do you need? To your earlier point about using your voice, maybe you need more executive presence coaching. Maybe you need conflict management. Maybe you need grant training. Like, really diving into the arena and exploring, what is it about this thing that people think I'm qualified for, but I want to be 100% perfect? Like, what has to close the gap to make you feel ready? You know, have you ever had a situation like that? Well, you just talked about this one, but I'm sure you see it all the time in your line of work. Like, women just are scared to step into that vacuum.
I think, honestly, it's the biggest challenge is women, not that they need the education or the training, it's that they believe that they're ready to do it.
Yeah.
That there's this idea of that it has to be the right time, and if I do it in the wrong time, something terrible is going to happen. And remember, like, especially as women, if you have families, if you have children, even if you just have a husband like me, like, there's always this question of, like, well, who's at home doing that? And it's, like, absurd, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, we look at these amazing, powerful leaders, and nobody asks the men, like, who's taking care of your kid right now? And so it's getting women to the point where they feel comfortable. And I think the piece of it is, it's not just that they don't feel worthy, it's that they feel guilty, that they're doing something that they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And so it's creating a space that gives them permission and allows them to really honor that it's what they want.
Oh, this word permission. So I launched with my co-founder, Lola Small, the Rising Beyond Power Collective. And it is a community that is free to join. And it's for women of color leaders. And I work with everybody, of course. But that really, for Lola and I, she is Taiwanese Canadian. So we don't even live in the same country. But we had this shared passion coming from the book that we wrote. And we were doing a 10-day challenge. It's January. Everybody's kind of involved in something. And we talked about core values and about aligning and sort of a little bit of visioning for the year. Takeata, the number of times, so we've had a couple Zoom calls, everybody's getting on, and it's very vulnerable sharing. It's in a really safe space. And the number of times that I hear things like, and I even say it myself, well, I gave myself permission to rest today. I gave myself permission to, like, not, the word permission, if I was doing that little, that Wordle thing, it would be so huge. And these are doctors, psychologists, healthcare workers, lawyers. These aren't, timid women. But the word selfish feeling selfish for taking care of ourselves and not what we need, the word permission, everything that you just said, it makes me super emotional because I do it too. And I have to like coach people out of it, but I catch myself also. What can we, what are some tips you would have for women that are maybe struggling with those two words, i.e. selfish and going after your dreams and, worrying about what people are going to say when it comes to the child rearing and all of childbearing, all of the things, whatever script is playing, and giving ourselves permission. Like, who the heck are we asking permission from except ourselves?
Yep. We're the worst.
Diabolical.
Right? We're the worst on ourselves. We're our harshest critics. Like one of my best friends from college, I tell her all the time, I'm like, you can't listen to yourself. Like that's whenever she says like my brain, I'm like, nope, you can't listen to yourself. You're telling yourself all the wrong things. I think one of the things that women really need to recognize is I'll take a step back. The word selfish is very negative, right?
For sure.
Oh, people are like, I don't want to be selfish. I have 9 siblings. And so number 1, learning to use my voice. But number 2, being selfish in that, like, no, I want that last piece of pizza because if I don't go and take somebody else is taking it. If I'm sitting here and be timid and be like, no, who else wants it? I'm not getting it.
No.
And so I think you have to think about it from that mindset. If you are not looking out for you, if you are not being selfish and putting yourself as a priority, who is?
And that's let's do the reframe. Instead of selfish, you're a priority.
Yep.
Because we wouldn't think to use the age-old adage of put oxygen on yourself.
Right.
Or else you can't help anybody in the plane. Nobody would be like, oh, you were so selfish to take oxygen for yourself. Now, do you want to, nobody would kind of question that.
But yet, when I have to take breaks and create boundaries because of my severe asthma and my chronic illness, it's literally like I have to take some time and just be able to breathe.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of time I can't.
Yeah.
And sometimes people find that very selfish. Like when I'm, missing birthdays or meetings or events, and that's something that I've really struggled with since I developed a chronic illness, is really putting up those boundaries. And in my head, I have to be selfish. I use the term. I like to turn like language on its head, right? People have negative terms. I'm embracing it. This is who I am. And so for me, like, it was really important that I set those boundaries. I make myself a priority in, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. And if that's not good for you, then, we'll part ways and I'll find a different opportunity or a different, place. And that's another piece I think that women really have to get comfortable with, is walking away from situations that aren't working for them. If you tell someone what you need and they're not willing to give it to you and you need that, then you need to go find someone who can.
I talk a lot about owning when you want more. Same kind of thing. Not being a wallflower with wanting more, whether it's more love, more money, more from your relationships, more satisfaction from, your vocation, whatever you're doing in the world, and not feeling, that was the whole premise of Beyond the Quo, Beyond the Status Quo. Because we could sit in status quo until the end of time. Really? And then you're 80 and you're like, oh, I coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? Shoulda all over ourselves. And I always tell people, men and women and leaders alike, there are 3 possible outcomes for diving into your life and trying to really figure out why this voice, this tiny voice is inside of you that demands more and is not satisfied, instead of just ignoring it or drinking it away or Netflixing it away, right? One is you're going to do the work and you're going to realize, hey, with these tiny shifts, I can actually find more joy. Whether that's, in my husband's case, he started jujitsu. He went back to motorcycle riding. Like, he found parts of himself that he had let go in the baby raising stages, right? Where we were just like roommates, right? So
survival.
Survival, right? And then for some people it is, okay, I need a change of environment, right? Like, I need to either change my job or maybe this relationship isn't working out, and having the courage to own that you want more and go get it. And then for some people it's such a violent wake up call And it's the smallest percentage, but it's the people that really reinvent. The whole reinvention happens. I think for me, with my almost death experience, it had to be that. I moved, I quit my job, like all the big things. But that imperative for me felt necessary. And I think people think when we talk about making changes or transformations or setting boundaries, to your point that you just said, or you had a health issue that impacted arguably every facet of your life.
Oh, yes.
It's your breath. It's not like, oh, something mundane, right? And so you putting in place your oxygen, to some people may have felt like an inconvenience. And so a part of the decisions that you probably have to make is, if this person isn't honoring my need for breath, like what do I do? Mm-hmm. How do women and I say women, leaders, navigate instances where maybe they've worked their whole life and now you're at the pinnacle of the thing and it feels really good but also really empty, and you're looking around and you've had a health diagnosis or a transitional experience happen, whether it's grief, loss, for some people right now, being laid off is like a big thing, right? The economy is doing its thing. What's like a little thing they can do? I shouldn't say little, but what's something like, given your experience and recalibrating what you need to be the best version of yourself while navigating the best treatment for you? Because obviously it's not one size fits all, whether it's environments that you're in or what you wear or perfume. Like, I can't even imagine, right? like how does that work?
I think for me, it was really about taking a step back and what is it that I want right now?
I love that.
Like, I know I'm that kid that knew at like 9 or 10 years old, I was going to be in politics and government. And like, I've been working towards that since then.
Yeah.
And so it was really taking a step back and saying, okay, yes, that's what I'm doing. I very much live in the dream that I had for who I was in working and helping empower women and doing the political work that I do, but recognizing that that's not exactly the end goal anymore. That's not, like, once you reach something, you can't just stay there and be like, yep, this is my goal when I was 10 and I reached it, so now
peace out.
So really, like, the last 5 years, I'd say, have been kind of stepping back, like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to be? And really, like, I do a lot of like actual physical planning, like in a planner. So writing out, here are my top 5 goals I want to accomplish in the next 5 years. And here are things I want to experience. Like, literally this year, my new thing is each month I sit down and here are the 4 people I want to see this month. Here are the 4 experiences that I want to enjoy this month. So fun things. And then here are the 4 things I have to do this month. And, it's really, obviously it's January, so I just started. But I like every year I come up with some type of system of like, okay, what is it that I want? Am I accomplishing it? Measuring it at the end of each month. I think it's really important if you're not really plotting and planning out what it is you want. And that process looks different for everyone. And I think it changes along the way, right? I needed a change last year. Yeah. I needed a break. I was as you said, I was burnt out. I was at a breaking point, and I made the decision to take a leave of absence from my job, go work somewhere else temporarily at a significant pay decrease. And I will tell you, it was exactly what I needed at that time. The re-energizing, the impassioned like experience that I was able to have, and then able to bring all of that back to the Women's Foundation, because I knew I didn't want to leave the Women's Foundation. My work wasn't done. But I needed space. And that was really a challenge to go to my board and, at the time, my other staff person and be like, hey, like, I know I run most of this stuff, but I think I want to leave for a little while. And I will say one of the biggest things I take into 2025 is that I did that and the world didn't end.
I have been exploring this concept of hypergrowth. That situation you just described, where you took yourself out of a successful, lifelong almost dream, right, mission, to take a pay cut, like all of the things that were the antithesis of success, right? Whatever that metric was, and dive in where I'm sure there are times you felt inexperienced or fumbling your way through it.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's the first time I felt
Right?
like so completely like I kept telling people I've not done this
Yeah.
before. I'm not really sure
Yeah.
what's going on, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah. And we don't want to let people down. And so a big part of this is, oh my God, how much do I confess that I don't know what the frick is going on right now? Like, but to your point, right? The growth that happens, and I think we underestimate our resiliency, our capacity to like shine differently. I know for me, entrepreneurship, so this is my beginning of my third full year. I say that, but I had a major surgery the first year and it took me out for 6 months. So really I'm still in my second full year. But God, every day I feel like shit, I don't know what I'm doing sometimes. Somebody said, oh, you need such and such for like your YouTube videos. And I was like, what does that even mean? You know what I mean? And so a part of this is in the scrappiness of it. In the scrappiness of it, I'm learning to appreciate my own capacity for humor. I feel like if I can't laugh at myself now, like, don't even bother. But also, who picks a role where no day is predictable?
You and I?
Right. None of my day and none of your, like, we don't know. We don't have like, okay, here's your standard, here's your, at any given day I could get up and there could be people on my calendar. I mean, I have like my structured clients and like my things that I do, but every day is sort of like a mini adventure. And so every day I'm like there's a little bit of feeling I'm behind the win. And I'm like, who chooses that? Right? But we do. And so I think that I really admire kind of what you did, but also the lesson in it, which is take yourself out of the comfort zone, go get uncomfortable, experience hyper growth, meet new people, inspire new people, be inspired by new people, and then come back in, not 100% change, but re-energized and rejuvenated and like bursting with a part of you that may have been, complacent for a little bit.
Yeah, you get really comfortable when you control everything.
Yeah.
Taking yourself out of that. I mean, I went from being the head of an organization where I was kind of running things.
Yeah.
Like people came to me and said, how are we going to do this? And then I went and I became middle management on a presidential campaign, working statewide, not having run a political campaign as my full-time job in almost a decade. It was terrifying, but at the same time
exhilarating,
it was
I'm sure.
Exhilarating because it showed me and it reiterated to me what I loved, what my true worth, my value, like I literally was just like, I'm really good at this. I'm really good at this. And that's all I keep thinking about the experience. I needed that because, for the last 5 years with the foundation, it's been challenging. I didn't wake up one day and think, I'm going to run a nonprofit. That was never on my list of things to do. And so when it became one of the things I was doing, it was terrifying.
Yes.
And so stepping away from that for a minute and really just kind of going back to where I started made me realize, like, yes, I can do this, but this isn't where I should be, right? It's kind of like if the CEO of McDonald's decides, like, hey, let me go make French fries for a couple months, right? Like, it's let me go do the work and see what's happening.
I used to love that show. Was it Undercover Boss?
Yes. My husband and I love that show.
I loved that show.
But that's kind of how it felt, right? Like, it was like I could do the job that I had, but I was grossly overqualified for it.
Talk to me a little bit about working within systems like politics. And I had ex-mayor Jerry Moyo on a couple of weeks ago. And in preparation for that session, I did a little bit of research on mayors just in general. And I think it was some crazy statistic that only 24% of mayors in the country are women.
Less than 5 are women of color.
Right. And one of the things she talked about anecdotally was she went to a mayor's conference and she was one of, I think, 3 or 4 women there, and all of them had PhDs and still felt like they had to run to keep up. And we talked a lot at the beginning of this segment about wanting to feel uber prepared, over prepared, overqualified. And men are just like 20, 30, 40, 50%. They're like, I'm done. I'm in. Count me in, Benny.
They'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
They'll find somebody else to figure it out for them. The stress that we put on ourselves as women is unparalleled to what I think most men experience. Obviously, there's a wide range that people experience, but I think women in general, we just put such a high standard on ourselves. Like we have to start on, like, it's just perfect example when you apply for a job. Yeah. Women will not apply for a job unless they feel qualified. Like they're like 90 to 95% of what's listed even more in the job description. Yeah. And like men will just see it and like, oh, I'd like that job. And the irony is that's kind of how I always approach it, is like, oh, I can figure that out or I can learn that. And so I spend a lot of time talking to women like, well, what do you want to do? And like they find this job and they're like, oh, but I don't have this. I'm like, yeah, but you have this and you can learn that, right? And so it's just a matter of having those conversations with yourself or with somebody that can really push you and say like, you've got this, like do it.
This is funny. I got invited to, it was by invitation only kind of networking event. It was at like 7 a.m. in the morning. It was something really obscure. And it was, oh my God, there were so many amazing people in the room. It was full. And it was just like this little conference room, a little folding chairs, like nothing pretentious. And I'm sitting there and I was like, what did I get myself into? And after everybody had their little introduction and, the business of the day and stuff, they present a topic that everybody kind of talks about. And think about you're in a room, like a back room, and everybody has Blockbuster and Netflix is on the horizon. Kind of like that. So they're talking about Netflix on the horizon. Takeata, they were talking about quantum computing. And I was like, say what now? And for a minute, my stomach dropped because not to be conceited, but I'm smart. Like, one of the big definitions in my life is I'm a smart girl. I may not be the prettiest, the richest, but intellect, I got that covered. And I felt so dumb. I was like, what? Where do you even use that? Is there an app for it? Like in my head, and I started just being funny in my head, but then I shut up and I just like listened. And for the most part, I think people were winging it also. They were winging, right. They were winging it from their frame of reference and from their expertise. And I was like, well, coming from strat planning and doing all of this, like modeling 30 years out at FEMA and doing catastrophic planning. And like, I started really, for me, it became like a Rubik's Cube, right? And so I'm like, shit, I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to sound so dumb. I don't care. They don't know me. I don't know them. I'm gonna just throw something out that I think makes sense, right? Critical thinking, and let's see what the experts say. So I raised my hand, and I was wearing my little black suit, and blah blah blah. I sounded so on point, and they were like, "Yeah, blah 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 blah." And in my mind, I was like, "Oh, I totally just winged that. I totally winged it." But it gave me such a hit of confidence. I'm not recommending opening your mouth if you are completely ignorant about a topic, but be brave enough and have confidence enough in yourself, I guess is what I'm saying. That was my lesson from this, to like put some things together within the frame of reference, within the context, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
Right.
It was so good. And I came out and I felt like, the first time I saw fireworks, I was just like, oh, but I came out and I did a little video to post on my like Instagram, and I was like, that felt so good. Like I literally felt my brain scrambling to grow. I don't know how else to describe it. That was some good coffee. But that I feel like when you talk about the experience you had last year, it must have felt like a roller coaster.
It was, but my husband was like, Takeata, you're alive again.
Yes. Oh, that's
like
fireworks.
No matter how tight finances got or things got uncomfortable, he was just like, but you're awake again. Because, between, getting in that rut of doing the same thing for a long period of time and being very good at it, but like it gets, the status quo gets very dull sometimes. But then also like being away from what my first passion in life always was campaigns. And it really allowed me. Now, do I want to do that full time 24/7? Absolutely not.
Yeah. But I think people start to pigeonhole you also.
Yes.
They see you as one dimensional. And I think it's important for us to not be one dimensional. Talk to me about kind of you as a human. So the husband, the puppies, like how does that work? Because, behind every strong woman is a dude, right? Like watching us in action and giving us that safety and that grace when we're working 11 p.m., 1 a.m., and not actually making a big deal out of it. Just, hey, do you need some coffee? What can I do? Like, I know I'm blessed. I feel like you are too.
Very much.
Talk to me about kind of the relationship dynamics.
So when I first met my husband, when we were first kind of starting to date, one of the things he said was, we'll make a great couple. You'll go chase your dreams and change the world, and I'll make money and take care of our house.
Yeah.
And that's really been a huge, like, I was, one day I could be home working for 12 hours, in my office, not seeing him all day. And then the next day I've got a call and they're like, yep, we need you driving to Jacksonville this morning. And so like I'm gone for 3 days on a whim, and he just, no complaints, took over, did what was needed. But also he's just this constant source of reflection, like of being able to see myself mirrored somewhere, and also just encouragement and support. And like sometimes people can be mean, and there were a couple of times where I've lived in this bubble that is the Women's Foundation, which is one of the safest, most amazing spaces I've been a part of and communities. But going outside of that can be a little jarring, and I did struggle with it. Sometimes I would just walk into my husband's room and he'd put his arms around me and be like, I just want people to be nice to me. And like he'd just give me a big hug and remind me that they don't define me, that I just, other people love me, the people that matter love me. And he was really that like constant source of keeping me going. And at any point in my life where I've come up with crazy things of like, I'm going to quit my job or I'm going to move across the country. Like at no point has he ever said, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
It's always just like, okay, what does this look like? How does this look for me so that I know how to prepare? So yes, I'm very, very fortunate to have my husband. But you said talk about me as a human being, and it's funny because he's not the first thing I think of when you talk about yourself as a human being. My immediate thought, and I think we've talked about this in the past, is, I'm a woman, I'm 42 years old, so I'm midlife, and really reached the point where it's like, I've been defined by what I can do, by my career, by my work for so long, that now I'm struggling, and that's like a big goal for 2025 is to figure out like who am I outside of what I'm good at.
Yeah.
Like, who am I outside of my work? And it's ironic because a lot of people, when I bring this up in public places, I was in a workshop with the Women's Foundation recently, and I was like, everything I'm doing is coming out. Like, we're creating a mission statement for our life, and I wrote the mission statement for the Women's Foundation.
Yeah.
And so it's figuring out, like, what does that look like? Who is Takeata outside of the work that she does?
And I think a frame of reference, because I feel like So I'll say this. I'm older than you, and I had my big crisis, I feel, right? Last couple of years, and have been navigating that at least for 7 years. I think 40 is when I hit my, and then it's just been one thing after the next, right? Including autoimmune diagnoses, like all of these things. And I feel like I'm coming into a pocket where the true essence of me for the first time is intertwined with the work that I do and the people and things that I serve. And you've been there. I think where you're working on is where I'm comfortable now, which is understanding that was the goal anyway. I almost think that you've been living your passion, because knowing what you want to do at 10, and I believe you, some people are just built that way. It's remarkable. At my core, I'm a writer. At my core, I have the ability to write and speak in a way that elicits emotion, and that translated into really amazing jobs and proposal writing and strategic planning and running offsites where I was able to like light a fire under sometimes hundreds of people to get them to do the mission of the thing. And so I think that we live our truth in different ways, in different jobs. But the pivotal point comes in this midlife pocket in our 40s for most of us, where life almost demands that you figure your shit out because the runway in front of you is so much shorter than the training wheels behind you. And I think that's where people can either opt out or lean in, and it gets very uncomfortable. It gets very horrible. I would say last year, totally vulnerable. Since I would say graduated college and always took on hard jobs. Didn't ever had like easy jobs. Last year was the year I made the least amount of money. And I've always been the breadwinner in our relationship. But it was, so for the first time, I literally was laughing. I was like, shit, I'm a dependent. And I was still recovering from surgery. And then I threw my back out and I was being so hard on myself. Because of course I knew if I put myself out there, I would get clients and do all these things. But there was a part of me that was just hibernating. And I was so hard on myself because that, to some extent, is my metric still of value that I'm working on. And Kevin and I were like laughing. And I said, oh my God, I feel like I have to ask permission for like, do you know what I mean? And he said, in no way, shape, or form should you ever feel like that. And you have to understand you are the one feeling that way and you've got to unfeel it. So I think for you, a part of this too is your definition of yourself in a family that big. Being multiracial, having a single mom, like it stacks, right? So you almost have to unstack it to get to the true power that is you. And I think at your core, you're compassionate, you're brave. I think that you are in your face, but not in like a horrible way. You hold a mirror up to people in a way that's, it challenges them if they're not ready, makes them a little squirmy. But you just kind of look people right in the face and you're like, what's up? And I think that still makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
Oh, yes.
Right. And we laughingly, me and my three best friends, we snicker and we're like, we're pretty sure we were witches at some point. Even the cackling laugh, right? But I think the term witches is not a bad thing. It was just women that did things differently and wore different clothes and had big boisterous laughs and got in your face, right? Yeah, they may have had a couple of brews here and there, but I think that for you, some of that, and for anybody listening, a lot of that work that we think is big is really going back to who you are at your core. And the people that know you very easily can tell you who you are. And for me, it was going back to this girl I went to school with when I was like 5 in Trinidad, and I was doing my little, can you give me 3 things that describe me? And I'm like, this chick hasn't, we're kind of Facebook friends. She's like, you haven't changed. And she was so matter of fact about it. She's like, you're kind. You look out for like, I would always be giving somebody lunch or something. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, oh my God, it made me so emotional. So I think it's not, we overcomplicate this. It really is so simple sometimes with the right support. And it really is about your core characteristics. And those are the things I feel like you have been using in the work that you're doing, which I admire so much. I don't know that I could do what you do full time. I don't have the patience for it. But I do think that you are a teacher. And it's imperative. So I think I'm a writer. Like pick a word. Do you know what I mean? Like something that you have threaded throughout your entire life. And that's really magical. And it sets us free to like explore that. I don't know if that made any sense, but.
No, it does.
Yeah.
Honestly, the big piece is
You have the big pieces figured out.
I want a life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's important.
But sometimes the things that are happening around us are so heavy and so prevalent that how do you separate that from the fun and the enjoyment and life?
But both sides of the coin make life. And, that's the hardest thing. I remember when same thing, you have this kind of come to whatever your faith is, but I'll just use the colloquial come to Jesus conversation. And I really turned away from any kind of formal religion or anything like that because I couldn't understand how two things diabolically different, for example, overeating and overindulging and then starvation could coexist. And like what I felt obliged to help one and guilty if you dabbled in the other, right? In overindulgence. And so I think that we just have to do our best. And that's the hard part. What is your best? But for me, it's really about right sizing where I am in the moment and not overcomplicating shit so much because we do that so naturally.
Yes.
How is your friends group? And I say friends, like your core people. You know what I mean?
I have actually quite a core group of friends.
Good.
I had, my best friends in growing up, my best friends in college, my best friends in high school, and I still communicate with them in those groups, I guess. But it's predominantly like they all live other places.
Yes.
Or I have a lot of friends who really struggle with anxiety and with social anxiety. So like we can make plans, but I'm always that friend that's like, if you need to cancel, just let me know, no problem. And so unfortunately there's a lot of struggle there. But when I need them, they're just a phone call or a text away. It's just the in-person that's a little
And I think that's I'm seeing a lot of that even with my daughter, like in her generation, is more of a comfort with non-in-person. And doesn't mean the connection and the support isn't the same, but I do think that human connection, it's this weird thing where the more you get of the human connection, the easier it is. But to get there, you got to get over your social anxiety to get to the humans, right?
Or, like my best friend in the whole world. I've had the same best friend since we were 6 years old.
I love that.
She is my person.
You could totally shout her out.
Her name is Misty, and I adore her. We met when we were 6. Her last name started with an N, mine with a P, and so we were alphabetically I was standing behind her in line in the 2nd grade.
Yeah.
And we've been inseparable ever since. Ironically, she knew my husband before I did. I knew her fiance before she did. And she also has a chronic illness. Yeah. And so we try, even sometimes when it's just like, we're just going to come couch rot at each other's houses. Right. But sometimes she's just like, I just can't, right? Or sometimes I'm just like, I got to stay on my nebulizer. Like, I can't get my breathing under control. And so it's a challenge, but in that sense, I get the reality. Like, life is just, we work with it. We roll with it.
Somebody was in a episode and she said, life keeps on lifing.
Yes.
And I was like, t-shirt. Takeata, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having
me. Amazing. So you've outlined some amazing strategies for folks that are listening to overcome obstacles. A couple of them I wrote down: leaning into failure, seeing it as a stepping stone, asking for help and redefining what strength looks like, right? Even if you are the expert. Collaborating to amplify impact, kind of setting that example. And failure is not the end. It's a step forward. I love, something like that. And leading by example is what I'm going to say. Because I do feel like even when I stepped into the Women's Foundation after leaving UN Women, I was looking for community first and impact second. Because for me, the vibe has to fit me. And I love that it's been years since we've been in each other's circles, and I still appreciate and admire the work that you do. And it takes gumption. It takes gumption to stay in that pocket. So thank you so much for supporting not only our community, but South Florida and kind of these women that are going, you're changing generations. And I think that is immaculate. Where can people find you and learn more about the foundation?
So womensfoundationfl.org is our website. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You can find us Women's Foundation FL. And we do post all of our events, activities. We've got some really cool stuff coming up in March here with our annual fundraiser, Raise the Bar. It's going to be beautiful. Rooftop at the Ben in West Palm Beach. Cocktail networking event. And then we also have our Girls Leadership Institute STEAM Academy, which helps girls get excited and lean into the STEM careers. And that's going to actually be right here in Boca Raton coming up on the 15th of March.
So you guys get involved. Learn more information. Takeata's information is going to be at the end of the episode, both on where you listen to your favorite podcasts and on YouTube, where you can actually watch us giggling and so forth. And if this episode resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. If it really resonated with you, please leave a good rating. It helps us reach more people who kind of need these messages. And you've already done the quo. It's time to go beyond. Catch you next week. Thank you.